Okay, so let's all take a breath and let's fully arrive into this space. And that means we leave behind our thoughts, our to-dos, all the things we've got going on for the rest of the day. And we just come here to this space. Take a breath. Good. Okay, and I'm going to share my screen. There we go. So here we are on this path, the path to peace. And we did the first one on our path, really learning psychology, learning how our body works and our behaviors, and then embodiment we did last week. And we're going to do embodiment again today. We're going to learn about something that I learned as I did my integrative somatic therapy training. It was integrative because we learned a lot of different modalities. And one of the things that we learned was internal family systems. And this has been one of my absolute favorites in understanding how we work as a system. So internal family systems is a therapeutic modality under that somatic therapy umbrella created by Dr. Richard Schwartz. It's evidence-based and highly successful, extremely popular because it really works. And it helps people to heal their relational wounds and their past traumas. And so Dr. Schwartz refers to maybe like our coping mechanisms or our feelings or emotions, anything that's going on inside of us that we can notice, like a thought or a feeling or an impulse, a behavior, he calls those parts. And he realized that we all have parts of us inside of us. And these parts interact with each other kind of like a family. And so he took family systems therapy and applied it to individuals and realized that that works really well to get people to recognize. And we all kind of sometimes will talk in that language of, oh, part of me feels like this. Well, part of me feels like this. Well, I have these two conflicting parts of me, right? We feel two different things at the same time. And he would call those parts. And so this was really helpful for helping people to understand that each of their parts plays a role and that it's not bad. It's just stuck in some kind of past moment, past trauma, past experience, where that behavior, that feeling made sense in that moment. And it's still showing up in our life today as that same part. But once we talk to that part and get to know it, understand it, we can help unburden it from that role. But the most important thing about internal family systems that he discovered, the internal, it's called IFS modality, is that we not only have these parts, but we have a self that is not a part. He calls it self with a capital S. We have this kind of energy inside of us that spontaneously emerges once we separate from these parts. And he realized every single person has this self energy inside of them. And the healing process occurs when we separate ourself from these parts. And that self energy, it has this loving, unconditionally loving, understanding, compassionate energy toward the part. And the part gets to be brought into that space of love and light. And that's how healing occurs. And that's really the basis of this whole IFS therapy, how it works. And so I want to, before I get too much into it yet, I want to talk about compassion, because that's a really big part of this, is that our self has compassion toward our parts. And one of my clients brought to my attention the other day that there is no Japanese word or translation for compassion. It's actually a Christian-based word. And so I want to talk about compassion for a minute. Um, Compassion literally means to suffer with, and it has an action-oriented meaning behind it as well. It's a suffering through, almost like we are going to suffer together through something. I will walk with you and suffer with you as we move through this pain together. And so I like this illustration. If you see it with looks like someone at the top of a well and then someone at the bottom. And so we can illustrate compassion in this way, that if we're at the top of the well and someone fell down and they're suffering and hurt, and we're looking down and going, oh, I feel really sorry for them down there. That's sympathy. We're feeling pity for them. We feel sorry for them. We do. We feel really bad. Now, if we look down and see someone at the bottom of the well and we imagine what it's like to be down there, now we're feeling empathy. Empathy is when we put ourselves in and we feel empathy, we feel bad for them. But compassion is a completely different experience. Compassion would be that person climbing down those steps to get to the bottom of the well and suffering with that person, and then together climbing up out of the well. I will come and be with you in your pain. I will hold your hand. I will be next to you and take bullets with you. And we're going to walk together out of this pain. We're going to do it together. But I'm willing to suffer with you this experience. That's compassion. It's a very powerful word. So I wanted to make sure we understood really fully what this word means. And the IFS concept is that we are able to have compassion for our parts, that we can be separate from our parts and then feel with them, suffer with them, and then bring them into the light and healing and love. And that's really what this modality does. And so the goal of IFS therapy is to embody this self energy of compassion, to embody it, meaning that we become willing to suffer with the parts of us that are hurting, the hidden emotions, right? The parts of us that we kind of shove down and don't really want to feel, the parts that we have buried for a long time. Having compassion, embodying this self energy means embracing those parts, being willing to feel those hard feelings. And as we do this, we have compassion and also curiosity. We're approaching these wounded parts of us with curiosity instead of judgment, knowing that all of our parts are good. They're not bad. They're doing what they're doing for a reason. Right? This is a different approach than we typically have with parts of us we don't like, specifically addictions or compulsive behaviors or destructive behaviors, parts of us that are hard to feel, that we don't want to feel, like sadness or shame. We like to kind of run away from them or move past them. Some people do a spiritual bypassing where they just kind of try to hop over the part and don't feel it and just try to only feel good. But we have, in order to heal, we have to have compassion. We have to be willing to suffer with those parts. And so we approach them with curiosity, and because we want to understand their story. And so the IFS therapy asks us to lean in and understand the roles that these parts are playing. And as we understand, then we can integrate them and bring them into our present moment. And then those behaviors no longer are present. They're no longer these destructive behaviors. They become integrated into our adult self. And so I'll just tell a quick story to illustrate this, so you can understand what I'm saying here. But as you know, for me personally, I use this. I love to only teach things that worked for me, that that had an impact on me personally. And so one of my parts, I used to have a part of me that got very distressed whenever I would try to be helpful, but then it would cause someone else harm. And sometimes I would, be just trying to do something nice, or I would try to fix something for somebody, or I'm trying to be helpful in some way, but probably not telling them first, but just going and trying to be a good helper. And then to discover that that person was like, that didn't actually help me. Ooh, that actually hurt me instead. Or, hey, that I didn't ask for that. Like, that doesn't feel good that you're trying to help me. And for some reason, I would just start bawling. Like, I would just start going into like a full trigger. Like, my whole body would just be panicked and feel like I'm bad and wrong and horrible, and all I have nothing I can do is right. And I shouldn't even try at all. I mean, just really big. It was a big response. And I was like, geez, this is obviously an overreaction to the situation. This must be a part of me. This is not my adult self. And so, in my own therapy, then I went to this part of me. I tapped into the feelings of this kind of panic and this feeling of being really bad and misunderstood. And I asked about this part of me. I asked, how old do you think I am? That's one of the ways that we approach our parts. We ask because this part, remember, takes over and is reliving the experience. And so we are 5 years old in that moment. We are 10 years old in that moment. We're really, our part is taking over and thinks that we're that age, right? So, how old do you think I am? And it said 6 years old. And I was like, okay, interesting, 6 years old. And then I asked some more questions about it. And all of a sudden, I said, the good question I like to ask is, what do you want to show me about being 6 years old and experiencing this feeling? And all of a sudden, I had this image pop up in my head. This memory came back of when I was 6 years old, I was trying to help my babysitter give my little brother a bath. He was a little baby. And my parents were gone, and I was a really good helper. And I put him in the bathtub, and it was burning hot. It was too hot for him. He was a baby. And all of a sudden, he was screaming, and the babysitter came, and she was like, "What did you do? How could you do that? What's that?" And I was like, I felt so bad. I was like trying to be helpful, and it hurt. And then I got in trouble, and it was terrible. And I'm reliving this moment, and I'm going, oh my gosh, no wonder you have this feeling. Like, you weren't bad at all. You were trying to be helpful, but you literally weren't in that moment. It was hurting. And so I had so much compassion for that little girl. And my heart just went out to her, and I felt her pain of that moment. And I was able to approach this little girl. And now I was separate from that part of me. I was no longer feeling the emotion as an adult. I was now separate and having compassion and love for that little part of me. And I said, hey, it's okay. You're not bad. You just made a mistake, and you're still a good girl. And I was able to bring her out of that traumatized state, out of that moment in time that she was stuck in, and helped her see that I'm an adult now and that she can be with me and she's safe and loved. And then the next time I had that experience, the next time there was a moment where I was helping, but then it was hurting. Apparently, I like to help people when they don't ask or something. And so then I felt it for a moment. I felt that trigger starting to come up, but then I remembered, oh, wait, that's that little girl. And I said, hey, hey, it's okay. You're okay, remember? You're still a good girl. And then I was able to respond differently. I said, oh my gosh, you know what? I'm sorry. I can see that I did that. I apologize. And I didn't fall apart and have a huge shame trigger. It wasn't like a big meltdown. And then the next time, I didn't have any feeling or response. I'm able to just be accountable when I make a mistake, when I do something that hurts someone. Now I can say, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't, you know, I apologize, or I didn't mean to do that. And, take accountability for that. And how can I make it up to you? And whatever, as an adult, like a normal adult response to making a mistake. I was no longer stuck in this trigger of being bad and wrong. And it was like the end of the world if I hurt somebody. So that's an example of an internal family systems process. And I've done it with a lot of parts of me. And I have different parts of me inside that are different ages. And I know which ones they are. And some of them I don't, they're integrated totally into me where I don't even have that trigger anymore at all. And so, and then some of them we're still working on some of the triggers, and I can notice when it comes up and I say, hey, oh, I know. All right, 14, calm down. All right, it's okay. I got you. We're going to be fine. Take a breath, right? Teenage part of myself. And then we breathe and then we're okay. And I can see, okay, what does that part need? Right. So it's this really cool experience of being separate from my trigger, from my part. And the IFS makes it where I feel like it's easier to have compassion because we see them as these little parts of us. Like, of course, I'm gonna have compassion for my little 6-year-old. Do I have compassion for myself as an adult falling apart? Not really. But then do I have compassion for a 6-year-old? Of course. But it's me. And so it's this beautiful process of helping us have compassion for ourselves when it might otherwise be hard to do so. Okay, so now I'm going to go back into my share. Okay. So I want to talk for a moment about this self energy, because this is a really important part of IFS, of the internal family systems, right? And this self, Richard Schwartz describes as compassionate, calm, curious, connected, courageous, creative, clear. He has all these C words that describe this self energy, and he says it exists in all of us and it spontaneously emerges. You don't have to grow it or develop it, it's already there. And I've been doing a lot of research on a lot of different religions and therapeutic modalities and spiritual practices. And it really has come to my attention that we have a universal way of thinking, that we are all here on this earth to become one with this source of love as much as possible, to become one with this source of love. And there's a lot of different names for this. Richard Schwartz calls it yourself with the capital S. Some people call it source, the divine, higher consciousness, universe, God. There's all kinds of names, Buddha nature, that we have for this source of love. It really exists, and it exists inside all of us. And as we are here on this earth, having this human experience, right? A lot of us have come to this understanding in little different ways, but it's all very much the same, that we're here to embody love. We're here to become one with this source of love, this higher power, this divine, the universe, whatever it is for you personally. This is our purpose here. So I have a couple of quotes. One is by Reverend Moon, who is the founder of the Unification Church, the church I grew up in. And I really love this quote. God wants a world of true families, a world where everyone becomes one with Him, representing Him in heart and love. And so, what I've also come to understand is that not only are we meant to experience this light and love, but in order to really do that, we have to understand what it means to be lonely. We have to be able to experience the darkness to really understand and appreciate the light. And we have to be able to feel the feelings of sorrow and grief in order to actually be capable of experiencing deep, deep joy. And so they're coming to this earth to we experience some pain or suffering or loneliness, darkness, and light, that there's both here, that there's a depth that we come to experience on this earth that is part of this human experience, that we can't avoid the pain and the heartache because it helps us to understand what love is not, so that we can really fully understand and experience what love is. And here's another quote by Reverend Moon's wife, Dr. Hakshahan Moon, co-founder of the Unification Church. I'm telling you that when you are on your way to the kingdom of heaven, you should not expect to experience only aspects of heaven. In fact, you must anticipate experiencing aspects of hell. You must absolutely anticipate that you will also travel to the rock bottom of hell, to the dungeons of hell. But I can assure you that these experiences are truly the most precious, for they will guide you to feel God's grace. So, why does going through hell allow you to experience God's grace? So, interestingly enough, this is really where psychology meets religion kind of thing, where in our bodies, our visceral experience of joy is also very similar to this visceral experience of sorrow, right? When you think back to moments of deep, deep joy, what do our bodies do? We cry, we feel pain, even though we're happy, we're joyful. But we cry, right? At the end of a really good movie, we cry with joy, with our heart being full, and it hurts. To really, truly love someone hurts. We feel this deep, deep joy. I like to tell the little story of my 9-year-old because it was just so impactful for me that when we got her guinea pigs for her birthday when she turned 9, and she burst out crying. She was just bawling because she was so happy. She was so happy. Her heart was so full. It was exactly what she wanted. She felt her experience of joy to the core of her body. And then what happens when we're experiencing this emotion is when there's others around us, we feel connected. We get to experience connection with other people in that moment. All of me and my other kids, we started crying with her. We were experiencing the pain of her deep joy together. And it was such a beautiful connecting experience. And the same thing goes for sorrow. When someone is feeling sad and you're able to be with them, to feel with them in their sorrow, there's a deeply bonding, connecting experience. We experience something, and that something, I believe, is love. We're feeling felt by another. We're feeling this compassion, suffering with each other. And Brene Brown talks about how we cannot have access to that deep joy if we have not been willing to experience deep sorrow. Physiologically, in our body, we have capacity to have feelings. but we only can feel to the depth across the board all the feelings. We don't get to pick and choose our feelings. We can't say, well, I'm going to experience this deep joy, but not the sorrow. It doesn't work like that. We have to be willing to experience deep, deep sorrow in order to get that precious moment of deep, deep love. Right? Imagine the, great people of all time. When you think of the people who had the most peace and compassion and love for the world, right? Jesus and Mother Teresa and Gandhi, right? These people who experienced suffering, really deep suffering and sorrow. But man, did they love. We have to be willing to do both on a deep level. We can't have one without the other. I have one more quote that I really like. This is from Dan Allender. He runs a trauma center. He's a Christian man and author. Really, really great work. The tenderness of God is always present, but the human heart is never more available to God's kindness and presence than when in grief. When we give ourselves permission to feel our vulnerable feelings, especially these ones like grief and sorrow, we are surrendering to the comfort of unconditional love. We are allowing ourselves to be fully seen and embraced. All of ourselves, all of our parts are important and needed. If you've seen the movie Inside Out, you remember sadness, that Joy keeps trying to get rid of sadness because she doesn't understand, why do we need this girl? But sadness brought such beautiful connection. They needed her. We need all of our parts, especially grief and sorrow. And it's important that we share that with others. The healing doesn't occur just by feeling it alone and in the dark. The healing occurs by exposing that part to light, to love, to God's love, to love of other people around us, to experience being seen and loved. This is the healing process. And so this is also inner child healing. This is inner child work. Richard Schwartz just calls them parts, but they're often little small parts, like my 6-year-old. And so we go to find these little inner children, these little parts of us that have been hidden in the dark, in shame, and we bring them into the light of love. And so we begin to understand and befriend and love our parts. We really come to see that they are all inherently good, right? Even the destructive behaviors, even the parts that we don't like, even things that feel immature, underneath, they really are good. And as we uncover them, we unburden them and bring them into the light of love, then they shed those behaviors. They don't carry those belief systems anymore. They stop showing up in the unhealthy ways because now they're full of love and they can let go of those things. Right? They were just trying to keep us safe or avoid pain in some way. And so this process is what it takes for healing to occur. And over time, these parts become integrated into our self, into the light of love. And this is the opposite of trauma. Separation is trauma. Integration is peace. So integrating is the antidote to trauma. You see, we have our self and then we have our parts, and they're separate. But once we bring them into ourself, into this love, then we become integrated. And then we feel at peace. And this is how we heal our trauma, by integrating. And so we're really integrating our darkness into the light. And I love this understanding because it's so fascinating. The universality of this, like this mirrors our processes as a human being, right? We begin in the womb, in the dark, and then we're born into the light. And then when we die, we also go dark and then go into the light. All the near death experiences are the same, right? Someone going into the light. This is our natural process as a human being. Even in the beginning of time, there was darkness, right? And then there was light. There was some light created that then shone onto the darkness, that integrated the darkness into it, right? This is our process as a human being on this earth, to integrate our darkness into the light. Isn't that beautiful? That's what this is all about at the very basic level. And that creates peace. And we create this peace within our own body, our own soul. This is where it begins, inside of us. And then it shines outwardly to everyone around us, everyone in the world but it begins right here inside of us. And so we start doing this process by separating ourself from our parts. That's the very first thing that we got to do. So we're going to do an embodiment practice that's going to help us with that. And this QR code is for you guys because I have this embodiment practice recorded on my YouTube channel, so you can do it anytime. And so if you just take a screenshot, and we'll also send out the link later too. And so we're going to do this embodiment practice together. And the point of this practice is to separate ourself from our parts. And so I call this the PIES embodiment practice, PIES, because we separate in 4 different ways. We check in with ourselves, with our bodies, physically, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually. PIES, PIES. So we're going to do that practice now together. Okay, so I want everyone to take a breath and limit your distractions. Come into this space. And we're going to check in with our physical body first. Okay, so what I like to do is close my eyes and I'll use my breath to do a body scan. So I imagine my breath coming in through my toes and going all the way up my body to the top of my head. All the way up. And as my breath is flowing through my body, I'm noticing, where am I holding on to stress? Where am I carrying negative energy in my body? And what does that feel like? Where is my breath constricted? Where is my breath blocked? Like I can't get the breath into that place in my body. Use your breath to flow through to notice. We're noticing our body. We're attuning to ourselves. This is healing right now in this moment. And so when you find a place in your body that feels like it needs some attention, that feels like it's holding on to something, maybe it's tight or heavy or fluttery, now we focus our attention and our breath right into that place. Like for me, it's my shoulder. So I'd imagine my breath now coming directly right into my shoulder, breathing in. And now as I breathe in, I'm going to invite spaciousness. So now I imagine my breath coming into my shoulder and everything opening up and expanding. Lots of space. And you can let your body move in any way that it wants to support that opening, that expansion. And we're not trying to get rid of the stress. We're just creating space around it. We're inviting lots of space now. Expand, open. And now with every exhale, you can invite your body to relax a little bit. You'll start to notice those knots untangling a little bit. Your grip starts to loosen. The fluttery feeling starts to calm. The heaviness starts to lighten. Very good. And now we're going to add a couple of vibrations on our exhale. Going to make a little noise to vibrate that vagus nerve. Ready? Everyone can do it in their own space here. All the way down. Feel that vibration. I like to put my hand right on my chest. I can feel that vibration. Beautiful. Very good. And now just notice any shift that may have happened in your body. Notice if you're feeling a little more relaxed, a little more open. If you do notice a shift, then you've already begun to integrate. You've taken some of that negative energy and brought it into the safety of this space. So good job. Okay, now we're going to do the intellectual. This is our thoughts. So now I want you to imagine your head, your brain, your mind, or you keep all of your thoughts. And imagine all your thoughts as kind of like little thought bubbles. And notice which thoughts have been taking up the most space in your mind. Which of those thoughts are the big bubbles that are just like consuming all of your energy and your attention and your focus? Which thoughts have been there, really taking up the most space? And as we do this, you'll notice we are separating ourself from our thoughts. Just like we noticed our body, we were separate from our body. Now we are separate from our thoughts. We're the noticer. We're the observer. So we want to do this without judgment, just neutral and a little curious. And so we notice these thought bubbles. We notice the thoughts that are taking up all of our space. Are these positive thoughts? Are these negative thoughts? Are these thoughts about the future? Or maybe in the past? Or maybe we're just overwhelmed with all the thoughts of our present moment? Notice that. Be curious about that. Oh yeah, I guess I notice my thoughts are focused on, I'm worrying a lot about the future, right? Or, oh, I'm ruminating about this one thing that happened in the past. Interesting. Because we're going to start to notice patterns. Do these same thoughts come up around the same person or same situation? This is how we start to notice our belief systems. Oh, right. Every time this happens, I start to think, oh, I'm such a failure. Huh, interesting. What is that about? That's a part. Notice that. And so we want to get curious about those thoughts that take up our space in our mind. And so we're going to shift now into our emotional check-in. We want to find out a little more about those thoughts. We want to start to feel the feelings that they carry also. So now I want you to focus your attention instead of in your mind. We're going to sink down into our bodies, our heart, our feelings, where we feel our feelings. I like to imagine my heart and kind of open up the top of my heart and look inside and see, what am I feeling about these things that I'm thinking, right? I want to connect deeper down into my heart. How do I feel about that? What feelings have I noticed over the last week or so coming up in my life? What is really on my heart? What is burdening my heart? What does my heart long for? What do I really want? And we start to connect with the deep, visceral experiences of these parts. And again, separate yourself. You are noticing these feelings. These feelings are parts of you. They're coming up in your body, in your life, because they want to be seen. They want to be addressed. Our feelings are clues. They tell us there's a need underneath. So you have a feeling, maybe if you're really angry and you're noticing a lot of frustration, what is the need underneath that? Is there something that you're not getting? Is there some way you're being hurt or mistreated? Are you missing out on something? Are you lacking love in your life? Are you not being seen for who you are? Nobody sees your effort, your heart. What is the need underneath? That is often a very young part of us. Notice that and separate yourself from that feeling, from that part. And see if you can have some compassion, if you can feel some kindness, some love toward that little feeling, that little part of you that longs to be seen or loved or is upset because it's being hurt. That dual experience of safety, love, compassion, and feeling our pain, that is healing. We have to separate before we can integrate. So that's what we're doing right now. We're separating from our part, from our little feeling, emotion, thought, and we're feeling love toward that part of us. And if we can't feel love toward that part, it just means we're still in another part. There may be another part of us that doesn't want to feel love toward it. It doesn't think that's okay, or there's a reason why we can't love that part. It's not good. It's hurt us in some way, or it's bad. And that's just another part of you. So this process is about separating from all of these little parts until we find compassion, until we find our unconditional love. So we're going to do our final piece of this check-in, which is our spiritual check-in. And this is how we connect to something that is outside of us, that is this unconditional source of love. So again, imagine your heart, and there's a door to your heart. And I want to see if you can imagine yourself opening up that door. And this is a practice now of receiving love. And so I want you to imagine the love of your higher power, whether it's the universe or God, source, the divine, whatever it is for you, this ultimate unconditionally loving, abundant, limitless source of love that exists all around us and inside of us. See if you can invite it into that open door of your heart. And I like to use my breath and imagine that love coming into my heart, filling it up with warmth, with light, breathing in this abundant, loving source of love into my body, into that open door. Sometimes it's hard for us to receive love because we haven't given ourselves permission. We don't feel like we deserve it. So in this moment, I invite you to give yourself permission. You deserve to be loved. You are worthy of love. And this love really does exist for you. So see if you can surrender to that love. Feel yourself melt a little bit. Open that door and invite it in. Let it come into your body, into your heart. Filling yourself up, and then let it trickle down to any parts of you that are feeling unloved, that are feeling empty or longing. Let those little parts feel that love. All of you deserves to be loved. All of you is worthy of love. Very good. And now just take a moment to notice how easy or difficult that was for you to receive love. Because it's very common for that to be a hard thing to do, especially the first time we do it. A lot of us have wounds around receiving love. Receiving love has been dangerous. It hasn't been safe. And we have a wound there. So there may be a part of you that protects you, that says no, doesn't let the love in. And that makes sense. You're not bad. That part is not bad. It's protecting you. So if that's the case, then allow it to be there. You can even say thank you for protecting me because you needed it to survive, to be here. It's part of your story. So all of that is information for you to know more about yourself. And so now you can open your eyes and come back. So thank you for doing that practice with me, for diving into yourself, into your own heart, into this journey, into this peace inside of you. And for some, it may have been open and easy to feel, and others, it may have felt really guarded. And both are okay because they both make sense. Each person makes sense. So all of this is information for you to know more about yourself. And my invitation is to continue to see yourself with compassion and love, that you make sense. And these parts of you that are struggling or in conflict, they deserve to be loved. And as you bring them up into love, then they will naturally integrate and find peace and harmony and connection instead of conflict. But it's that willingness to suffer, the willingness to open it up and look inside, that we have to do first to find that peace and that healing and that integration. So I think that is my conclusion for today. Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining, for being here. And you can do that embodiment practice every day, anytime. Click on the video and I guide you through, and you can continue to practice separating from yourself and finding peace within. All right. Just a short video about the internal family systems therapeutic modality and what that entails. And so the internal family systems is a somatic therapy that was developed by Dr. Richard Schwartz, and it means that it has to do with the body. It means that we are using the body as a tool for healing. And so Dr. Richard Schwartz was actually a family therapist first, and he discovered that we all have an internal family, that he used the family systems therapy model on individuals, treating their internal family like an actual family. He realized that we all have these parts of us inside of us that have roles that we play, and that these roles are often immature or destructive, or from younger parts of us that have been kind of playing those roles ever since we were kids, because we needed to adapt to our environment in certain ways. And so our behaviors that we had back then, they're still showing up today as adults. And it's just because we have these little parts of us that are still kind of playing in those dysfunctional roles. And that once we discover that and separate from those parts, then we can begin to unburden them from those roles and integrate them into what he calls the self with a capital S. So the other main point of internal family systems is that we all have this self energy, this source of compassionate, unconditional love that exists within each of us. And this self energy spontaneously emerges once we separate from our parts. Once we get some space from them, we actually just naturally, spontaneously connect with and feel this self energy. And so this compassionate stance between that self and our parts is the healing process. This is the basis for IFS therapy. So we have certain roles that our parts will play. And so you see we have our self there, and then we're made up of all these little parts that are not the self. And our parts fall into different roles. And so the three main roles, we have firefighter, manager, and exile. So the exile is like our wounded parts. They're like our little inner children, the parts of us that have been wounded in the past and still show up today as like kind of negative emotions in our life: fear, sadness, overwhelm, helplessness, things like that. And then we have the two protectors of that exile. We have two parts, different kinds of parts of us that will show up that basically just try to suppress and keep that exile down, submerged, where we can't feel those feelings because they're too painful. And our brain doesn't like to feel those feelings. And so we have these parts of us that will show up that were ways to protect us from feeling that exile's feelings. And so the firefighters and managers are both protectors, but one is a more proactive protector and one's a more reactive protector. So let's get into the parts a little bit more in detail. So we have our manager part, and the manager is a proactive protector. The job of the manager is to control our life so we don't have to feel the feelings of the exile, right? It kind of dominates our life and tries to keep everything steady and in control and doesn't like to have big feelings coming through from our past. And so managers, they basically help us focus on preventing the exile from getting triggered, right? From showing up in our lives, trying to control everything to make sure that we don't have a big feeling that kind of shows up. And so a manager part of us often looks like our people pleaser or caretaker or controller. Maybe we're a workaholic or a high achiever. We want to be good or follow the rules, or maybe we're a perfectionist. That's often how the managers show up. And sometimes they are more negative, maybe a rager or maybe an addiction or something too. But generally, manager parts will show up as parts of us that want to look good. And so they're trying to maintain a sense of calm and control over our lives, and really, in spite of whatever the feelings are, trying to keep that suppressed no matter what. And so even if you've seen the movie Inside Out, Joy, the part that part was a manager, right? She kept trying to suppress sadness and not feel sadness and just keep everything looking really good. So that would be an example of a manager part. So now we've got our firefighter part. That's a reactive protector, right? So the job of the firefighter is to stop the pain of the exile no matter what. Just to, when the exile does break through the manager's control, then the firefighter comes in to try to just get that feeling suppressed or get as far away from it as we can as soon as we can, right? So they're reactive protectors, and they share the same goal as the managers. They want to suppress the vulnerable parts and extinguish that emotional pain however they can, right? They're like emergency response workers coming in with the big hose and just get that feeling away. And so they only get activated once the emotional pain does break through the control of the managers. And so the firefighters tend to be pretty fierce and use extreme measures that the managers don't like rage or addictions or abuse, promiscuity, violence, and even ultimately suicide is the part. Sometimes people have a part of them that wants to commit suicide because it's just trying to escape the emotional pain. That's really what it comes down to, is escaping the pain or getting away from or ending the pain however it can. And so their goal is to distract or stop the emotional pain as fast as possible without consideration of the consequences. And that's the firefighter part of us. So then we have our exiles, and the exile is our wounded part, and its job is to keep trying to push past those protectors so that it can be loved by the self, by that sense of unconditional love, whether it's in ourselves or if we feel it from others. That exile wants to keep pushing through to be seen, to be acknowledged, and to show us that we have a wound. And so it does keep trying to push past however it can. So it's an injured or wounded or traumatized part of us, usually pretty young, and meaning that the trauma occurred at a young age. And right, that part of us has been frozen in that moment of time ever since. So exiles are parts that have often been dismissed or shamed or neglected in childhood. And they're parts of you that we typically try to hide, right? Those parts of us, or suppress them or ignore them because of the emotional pain that they carry with them. So an exiled part will often get triggered by something in the present moment that reminds them of that past wound. And so it shows up as a big negative emotion like fear or sadness in that moment. Yeah. So we have these different roles, and in general, our manager tries to stay in charge. And for a long time, a lot of people do manage to keep their lives under control for the most part. They have a manager that tries to control things and control people and control their lives. But then eventually the manager gets overwhelmed and exhausted. We cannot keep up that role of manager forever. It just doesn't work. Hence midlife crisis. We often find ourselves in this place as adults, with the parts of us that used to function and control things are just depleted and exhausted. We can't keep up the act. And so the exile keeps on breaking through, the exile keeps on getting triggered and busting through, and then the firefighter has to come in to try to extinguish the exile, and the manager is just done. So now we have just basically the exile and the firefighter in charge back and forth, and life becomes unmanageable. It's just too much, too many big emotions, too much negative behaviors, and too many consequences, and it becomes unmanageable. We can't keep going. And you see on the left, the parts, as long as all the parts are in control and taking over all the time, we don't have access to our self energy. And so basically we kind of eventually get tired enough or desperate enough to seek help to try to find some peace to this internal battle. And so the only way to really break that cycle is to separate from our parts and to allow our self energy to emerge, to have compassion and curiosity and love toward these parts of us. And we can find that through other people, and we can also find it even in our own body. Our own body has this self energy. Everybody does. Everyone has a self energy within them. Richard Schwartz describes the self as the you who is not a part. It's your inner source of unconditional love. And he said everybody has one. He never met a person who didn't have self energy that spontaneously emerged once we got enough space from the parts. And when this self energy emerges, there is these 8 C's that Dr. Schwartz has claimed that exist in every person. And when you feel this energy of one of these 8 C's, you know you are in your self energy: compassion, curiosity, calm, courage, confidence, creativity, clarity, and connectedness. These are our 8 C's. And so when we are experiencing this energy, we're in our self, right? We're in our adult self, in the present moment, feeling safe and connected. And when we are not feeling any of these, if we're in any other feeling, desperation or helplessness or loneliness or anger or whatever, then we are in a part. That's it. We're just experiencing a part. And so the healing process takes place when we pause and we slow down and we get curious about our parts. And so just an example to help illustrate is when I was in high school as a teenager, I had an exile that was lonely, that was wanting to be loved. I had where in my home, it was more emotionally avoidant. My parents were more emotionally avoidant. And so I longed to be seen and loved. And so that came out in a, a craving for food, for comfort through food as a source of comfort and love. And so my manager part of me didn't like that, eating too much food and gaining weight and not looking the way I wanted to look. And so the manager part of me kept trying to go on a diet, or would try to write out all of the exact things I was going to eat every day. And I had this whole plan, and then I would constantly, my little exile would break through and have a craving and eat something I wasn't supposed to eat anyways. And then I would have this, the manager would kind of double down on the control using shame, using this kind of, you are bad and how could you do that? And oh, you're such a loser and you just can't stick with it. And this kind of self-betrayal, this feeling of just feeling so bad and shamed that it would shove that exile down again. And then I'd try again. Now, eventually, when that even the shame didn't work and I kept on busting through, that little exile kept busting through, then I had a firefighter come on in. And my firefighter was bulimia, and it would cause me to purge and throw up my food. And that was a way to escape the shame too of and the negative energy coming in from the manager, and also allow me to not feel so bad about myself because I was able to not have to hold the food that I had taken in. Now, obviously, that's really unhealthy and it wasn't good for me. And that didn't last either. It got to the point where then I didn't even have the manager anymore. I was just binging and purging and binging and purging. And I didn't even have a part. My manager just got exhausted from all of it. And so my life became unmanageable. I couldn't continue like that. It was very destructive to my body, to my ability to perform and be happy in life. And, luckily I did have a really good friend who I finally confessed to. I finally was able to expose that part of me, the exiled part, the one that was feeling lonely and unloved, and I was seen. And I was seen in love. My friend showed me unconditional love. And I was able to, once that was exposed and put out into the light and under the light of love, then I was able to, with that support, find my own sense of compassion and bring that little part of me into love instead of being constantly in this battle of shame and suppression and that kind of thing. So I was able to find some self energy through someone else in my life. And that was really healing for me. And so that's one example of how our parts can be working in a system that that system will continue to spiral and get worse and eventually become unmanageable. And so even the unmanageability we can be grateful for. I'm grateful that it finally came to a point that was really dangerous, that finally was enough for me to acknowledge the wound, right? And that little wounded part, the exile won't go away. That's the thing. They don't go away. Our little parts of us, they're always going to be there. And so this is the beauty of our body in always striving for balance and fighting for love, fighting to be seen, that it will continue to push through in some way. And so this is the basic concept of the internal family systems, is this integration of our parts into this unconditional love of ourself. And so if you want to know more about the process and how it works and how to do it, you can do it on your own. If you want to get the book, No Bad Parts by Richard Schwartz, he gives meditations and guidance and walks you through all the different roles and how to unburden these parts of you. And so you can do it on your own. That way, you can also seek an IFS therapist or coach to help guide you through this process. And that's my email. You can email me, reach out. I do also IFS coaching for people. And I also run a support group that is, so if you want to be kind of working it on your own, you can join a group of other people who are also working on this and working with their parts and discovering that. And you can get the benefit of the self energy of the group to help you as well. And I have my support group advertised on generationalhealing.org, and you can find that IFS support group there. So these are just some ways that you can continue on this journey of learning about yourself and your parts. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to working with anyone who would like to give it a try. All right, take care. Bye.